Welcome to the course on Varieties of English, an introduction to language variation. Variation means change. Therefore, this whole course is all about language change. To state the obvious, language always changes. It always allows variation. That is why the only stable thing about the language is that it is not stable. The more speakers use the language, the more rapid, the more diverse this change is. The English you study does not exist in one solid form. It's more like a mosaic of different variants that is shaped by numerous speakers. And now this mosaic covers the whole globe. Thus, my talk today is centered around the idea of a language change and what it looks like when we consider a language which is seen as a global one, like English nowadays. First of all, let's dwell on the question why a language changes and how it can possibly change. A language is not used by the machines, but by people who differ from one another in terms of the region they live in, social classes they belong to, generations, genders, and the list of these social factors may go on and on. Therefore, there is language change in mass, something that we will call dialect change. In addition, language changes within one particular speaker. Depending on the social context, one and the same person may change the way they speak. They use certain words when they talk to their professors or to their enemies, though sometimes these people are in the same category. The words people choose to express their thoughts may depend on the form of communication, written or oral, register, public speech or friendly kitchen talk, the aim of communication, to make them like me or to make them frightened. All these will determine the variety of a language the speakers may use. The scholars have determined a couple of forces that cause language change. They are articulatory simplification, regularization, contact between languages. These forces are considered to be universal, that is, they are assumed to exist in all known languages, and they make languages change in several levels. Hence, one can identify the following levels of language variation: phonological variation, lexical variation, morphosyntactic or grammar variation, and finally pragmatic variation. You may notice that these levels of variation coincide with the structural layers of a language. For example, phonological variation involves changes at the level of sounds. One simple word may be pronounced differently in British and American Englishes. For example, the word denoting an edible red berry, that most people consider to be a vegetable, in Britain will be pronounced as tomato, and in the States as tomato. The difference in pronunciation does not just boil down to the changes in the vowels. In British English you have a monophthong R, and in American English you have a diphthong A. The second consonant T is realized differently in both these dialects. In British English you have an alveolar stop, and in American English you have an alveolar flap. Listen to the differences. Tomato, tomato, an alveolar stop, T, and tomato, tomato, an alveolar flap. There is something between T and D, but some people also hear R. Tomato, tomato. This alveolar flap occurs in the intervocalic position when the first syllable is stressed, and it is one of the most distinct features of American English. Pronunciation is not the only feature of the language system that may differ in English varieties. Vocabulary may be as distinct as phonology. There are a lot of quite well-known examples when one and the same object can be named differently, not just in various English-speaking countries, but within one and the same country. For instance, In the United States of America, what a carbonated non-alcoholic beverage is called, soda, pop, Coke, varies across regions. You can see it in this map. Most South states call it Coke. They are in red, whereas Northern states call it pop. They are in blue. And the East Coast states, along with California, Nevada, and Arizona, prefer to call it soda. Another thing that varies from one variety of English to another is grammar. There are many things that may be different in dialects in terms of grammar. For example, Americans tend to use the past simple where Brits would use the present perfect. The Americans say, "I just ate," instead of "I've just eaten." Apparently, such differences are minor. However, there are peculiarities that you may consider atrocious violations of all grammatical rules. Consider the second example here. "I ain't go no time for that." Even though this sentence may sound for you as broken English, in fact, there are more dialects that allow negative concord, double negation, rather than forbid it. You can have a look at the map here. In red, you see the instances where negative concord is pervasive or obligatory. So, statistically speaking, one negation per sentence is an oddity rather than a rule. Finally, pragmatic variation reflects the ways how a certain context shapes the language you use. I've already given examples concerning the register and the style of communication, which may trigger language change or, in other words, may make people choose some forms of a language over others. So, a language changes every single day, every single moment of its existence, as long as there are people who use this language. But what will happen to a language when there are billions of its users who live in all the corners of the world? This is quite a unique case of a global language that we can witness nowadays. There are quite few languages in the world that can demonstrate such a variety of their dialects like English. One can think of Spanish or Portuguese, for example. These languages have dialects that are spoken in countries of Europe and in Latin America. However, these languages cannot claim the status of global languages. I assume everyone would agree that English is the only global language at present time, and this status has a significant impact on English variation. But let's start from the very beginning. History of English starts with the process of migration of three Germanic tribes from the territory of present northern Germany and Denmark to the British Isles. The tribes of Jutes, Angles, and Saxons invaded the Isles and took over the territory of modern England. They spoke the Germanic language, which gave birth to Old English. The first period of English history lasted approximately from 500 to 1066. Old English had little resemblance with the language we know now. It was a highly synthetic language, but due to the forces I've mentioned at the beginning of this talk, namely articulatory simplification and regularization, it changed and got many of the features it has now. The third force, contact between languages, was also present during the Old English period, but was most significant during the second period of English history, Middle English. In 1066, due to the dynastic crisis, the English throne was usurped by William the Conqueror, who, being a relative to the English king, was brought up in Normandy and spoke French. For almost 2 centuries, from 1066 to 1204, English was no longer an official language in England and was spoken only by the common folk. Only in the 15th century the English language fully regained its position as an official language, but by that time had changed greatly, mainly in terms of its vocabulary and spelling. However, back then English was still a regional language. In 1582, an English politician said that English would never be learned outside England, as it didn't even have a proper literature. Little he knew that that very year a certain actor from the town Stamford-upon-Avon got married and moved to London to write some of the most intricate pieces of literature in the language that would soon become the language of the first British colony in what is now known as Virginia. So English starts to spread beyond the British Isles in the early modern English period, when the first colonies in the New World appear. The foundation for English to become a global language was laid during the time of the British Empire. During the so-called Britain's imperial century that lasted from 1815 to 1914, English was spoken and taught in all British colonies, which back then included about 80 nations or 23% of the world's population. Additionally, English was of course the language of the former colony in North America that had gone its separate way in the 18th century. Thus, the main factor that contributed to the spread of the English language and the growth of its speakers was political and economic power. At first, it was the power of the British Empire, the largest empire ever created in the world. Then, it was the power of the United States of America that led the way in the fourth technical revolution. As a result, English is the world's language for the airplane transportation, IT, and science in general. The Internet started as a 100% English source of information. Nowadays, we have all sorts of languages on the Internet, but still, the English Internet comprises the largest part. Finally, we should not forget the power of money. English is the language of world's banking system. All in all, the factor of military and economic power contributed to the spread of English, while the factors of technological and now cultural power safeguarded the status of English as the global language. Nowadays, there are about 2 billion English speakers. The remarkable thing about this situation is not the number of English speakers, but the proportion of native speakers to non-native speakers. For each native speaker of English, there are 5 non-native ones. The statistics is as follows. There are about 400 million speakers for whom English is the first language. About 650 million of those for whom English is the second language. And most of them live in India, approximately 400 million. And there are about 1 billion people who study English as a foreign language. The number comes from the British Council and includes people who speak English at beginner to advanced level. This extremely large number of speakers is conveniently classified in terms of circles. The model of English circles was proposed by the Indian linguist Braj Kachru in 1990. Kachru's model describes the global development of English using a series of ever-expanding circles. The inner circle comprises those countries where English is the native language and includes the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States of America. The second, or outer circle, comprises those countries like Nigeria, India, and Singapore, where English is widely spoken as a second language. Finally, there is the expanding circle. This is by far the largest of the three and currently includes all the places which are not already in the first two circles. These are the EFL countries, the countries where English is a foreign language, but is increasingly seen as essential not just for survival in the foreign environment, but also for prospering in the world village. Such a diversity of speakers is reflected in the diversity of varieties of English spoken in the world. As a result, the increasing use of the English globally makes it more open to such linguistic phenomenon as language shift. The mechanism of language shift can be summed up in two verbs, adopt and adapt. When a community adopts English as a means of communication, it quickly adapts it to its own cultural background in order to create a sense of ethnic identity. As a result, native speakers of English, when traveling to the parts of the English-speaking world, have trouble understanding their own mother tongue. This often happens with words used in a particular part of the English-speaking world. For example, in South Africa, where English is an official language, while driving, one can come across the sentences like these ones. Robot is broken. Turn left at the robot. You'll have 3 robots ahead. In South Africa, robot means traffic lights. In this case, one can speak about words idiosyncratic to the South African variety of English. The changes that happen to English because of its status as a global language give much food for thought about its future. How will English develop, and what will it become? When considering this question, one may find 2 possible answers. The future of English may be multilingualism. That is, numerous dialects of English will become so distinct that they will be treated as separate languages. Or it may be multidialectalism. That is, dialects will be preserved, but they will not become too distinct, and the speakers of English dialects will still be able to understand each other. Partly because there will appear a new dialect of English universal for all, a certain lingua franca English, or world standard spoken English, which will be a culturally neutral variant of English. Let's consider both options. People used to support the idea of multilingualism 100-200 years ago. Noah Webster once proclaimed the development of the new language, American English, different from the British variety, when he introduced new spelling for American dictionaries. He was a supporter of a new independent nation which would have a new identity, expressed, along with other things, by a new language. Besides, people had a vivid example of Roman languages, such as French, Spanish, Italian. These languages derive from Vulgar Latin. Initially, it was one language, but in the course of 1,000 years, there have appeared distinct languages spoken in different countries. Though American English has been developing for more than 400 years now, it is not that distinct from British English to be called a different language. The possible explanation to this is that besides the need for identity, there is another force that influences the development of a language. Apparently, there is a deliberate desire to change the adopted English language so it is different from the British standard. However, there is the need for intelligibility on a global scale. Speakers of English from the outer circle want their English to reflect their local identity, but at the same time, they want to be understood by English speakers from other countries of the English-speaking world. The fact that nowadays we live in a global village where there is immediate access to other languages and varieties of English contributes to the fact that English is still mutually intelligible all over the world. Thus, varieties of English continue to develop. Furthermore, the melting pot of all world Englishes creates a necessity to form a new variety of English intelligible for all speakers. At present, one can witness the formation of Euro-English, which is gaining its momentum in the EU when representatives of many different countries where English is a foreign language meet to communicate on day-to-day basis. One can hear Euro-English when the French, Greek and Germans come into contact, each using English with its own pattern of interference from their mother tongue. As a result, they strive to use a specific form of English that would be understood by their interlocutors. even though those who have a high command of English when meet up in Brussels conform to the rules of Euro-English. David Crystal lists the number of features common for this new variety of English. They are here on the slide. So, the possible future of English is seen in the further development of distinct dialects, which would help their speakers to express their national identity, as well as the formation of a dialect that would guarantee its speakers international intelligibility. Needless to say that those capable of mastering several English varieties will be in a much more powerful position than those who can use only one. To conclude, English has been changing for thousands of years and continues to change because of the forces existing in every language. And as I've mentioned at the beginning of this talk, the only stable thing about the language is that it is not stable. That is why the existence of different varieties of English is absolutely normal as it ever gets.